it's over, so we put our hands up like a ceiling can hold us.
This is Tina Biello, my friend. Everybody. Thanks for coming.
The first time I've had all 4 books in one room because Sylvina chose poems from each book. So I will just give you a small sampling from each book, if that's okay. And usually when I read, I start with the poem. This is my very first book, and it's about the village where my family come from, Casa Calinda in the south of Italy. And Sylvina is live painting as we do this, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
So I will be putting in some imagery from your poems that I'm reading today.
Okay.
So let's get
All right. All right, I'll just keep going from this book called Si Vende. And that is about a house for sale in Italy. Si vende, for sale. These walls talk. They tell you a family once lived here, loved the inside space between these 4 walls. Now this house is empty, no longer inhales, exhales life. The family emigrated to a country where the sun doesn't shine in spring. Who will sing their stories, pray their prayers? Do they know they will miss the light? Only when they reach the gray of Western Canada. The trees, giant men casting shadows onto their memories of light, of a beloved house that smelled of roses in Casa Calinda. This one is called Nonna Carmela in 2 parts. And it's a little bit about the kind of what happens when I've been back to the village a few times. And this was one of those times. Every time I come back to Casa Calinda, I go in search of her, Nonna Carmela. She's not my grandma, but she reminds me of her in a soft skin way. She always sits on the bench in front of La Casa di Fantillo, the house where my mom was born. She sits and watches. Whose relatives are here from America? What's that phone they have against their ear? Did they come in by train or car? Chi è sposato? How many kids? She always remembers me. Are you married yet? No, non sono sposata. E tu figli buoni, mariti ti danno guai. Husbands bring you nothing but heartache. 2. I speak to Nonna Carmela. My arms get up and dance, a gesture life all their own. My dialect moves me. Some days there are tree roots below my feet, olive trees. My feet are purple from the grape skins my father stomped on as a child. The sticky dough under my fingernails is from the loaves of bread my mother made, hauled down to the 1-brick oven. Some mornings I wake up with a dull ache at the base of my skull. This is from all the water my mother hauled in the cutore on her head, 5 miles from the fontana to her house. I smell hay and horses, figs ripening on trees I can't see, licorice roots wrap around my legs, climb like a serpent to my mouth, tell me stories I never heard. Nonna Carmela tells me to remember, says this is who you are, this is where you come from. 8 Cottonwood Street. Outside, the rain comes down sideways, the trees giants. A fast-flowing river can be heard, owls nest, trout jump. Inside this house, it is 30 degrees and the geraniums bloom. Dust from the farm gets tracked in on boots. Horses neigh in the stable down below. This house smells like summer and heat. Tomatoes simmer to become sugo for tonight's meal. Here, the percussive rhythm of a language beats under the house, keeps them dancing in the damp, wet coast. Poetry is the closest to the heart as far as I'm concerned. It goes straight to the heart. You have to get a lot on a small amount of, a small page. You have to get a lot in. You have to have a story. So you have to go to the heart, and that's why I love poetry. People turn to poetry in their times of greatest sorrow, greatest joys. It's really something that gets us through. Sorry, okay, I'll start with this one, because Selena chose it, and then I'll read a few. So this book is a lot about, mostly about my mom had early onset Alzheimer's. She died in her 68, and I was in my 20s, so, and in hindsight she had it probably in her late 50s it started. So a lot of this is my story through that, but this is called Morning 2. 6 a.m., time for the day to begin. I start with the youngest. She takes the most time. By the hot stove, I give my baby a bottle. My baby, now 3.5, drinks and chews the nipple, rubs her tiny finger along my pant leg while I cook breakfast. This life in Canada is not hard. This work is not work. Yet there are days I am tired. How can I complain? I have an oven, electricity, hot water in the house. When the pancakes are done, I will scoop her up for a cuddle. I know this is why she is here early, in the dark. As the light comes in the kitchen window, I will rock her. Years later, when I am dead, will she remember my holding as the night turns to day? This one is called Knitting. I never did learn to knit. Later, Mom's brain resembled her blankets. Synapses knotted together, keeping her warm but no longer firing. Knit 1, purl 2, cast on became too hard. Casting off at a very early age, she left her needles to me. Stuck with lucky, short-necked stubby. It's Thursday, past the night. Sugo simmers in the pot all day. The doorbell rings. Shirley's here for beer and a plate of Mama Pina's pasta. She walks in, hair coiffed, smells of fresh perfume, a hint of hairspray and stale smoke. Cigarette glows between her nails, showing off her recent manicure. Oh, Peter, good to see you. Thought I'd come by for a visit. Oh, look at the time, you're just about to eat. The Italian mama in the house is polite, has to do what's right, and offers her guests some food. Pete grumbles under his breath. He won't relinquish his homemade wine, so he orders the youngest to go get Shirley Nabira. He figures this manja cake won't understand the sacrilege of beer and pasta. The youngest returns to the kitchen. Steam rises from pasta plates set. Shirley sits at the head. Thank you, dear. Oh, lucky beer, my favorite. Buon appetito. So again, I'll read one that Sylvina chose, which is Knife. So this is in 4 parts, and this was fun to do, is to take a regular everyday object and write a poem about it. Knife. Beware the dull henkel, for it will cut you worse than when it is sharp. It is in disguise as a tool that will help, when it will surely only hinder. Which came first, the knife or the fork? Which utensil was more useful, the one that would cut the meat or the one that would lift it to a mouth? The modern-day knife is a distant relation to the chopstick, which in Asian culture can become a weapon, always on hand to use when eating in case of attack. Predictably, in any meal, the knife sides with the spoon. In some folklore situations, it ran away with the spoon. It is not the loner, rather it protects the lowly spoon, which could not stick up for itself and is better at tricks like hanging off a child's nose. Forks may make the difference in the roads and rivers, but it's the knife undoubtedly that divides. Says this is this, and that is that. The knife may not tune an orchestra like the fork, but it provides the perfect cut of hair from a horse's mane for the cello bow, that resonant, that clear.
Can I add something about
Yes,
that?
please.
So when I was doing that painting, first of all, I had to look up the brand of the knife because what is this? Like, I don't know what it is. And then I painted or interpreted that type of knife, which is very pointy, very sharp. And it was on the painting, and once it's done, I'm like, wait a minute, no, that looks very aggressive. That's not me. So I had to erase it and put another one that's not aggressive.
You did a good job.
Thanks.
Sylvie, who was your first crush? I ask at my group. Sylvie says, oh, that's easy, it was a girl. The room goes quiet. She takes herself to her first high school crush, Marie-Claire, the blonde who the nuns adored. So did Sylvie. She wished she could climb right into that strawberry blonde, wrap it around her bosom, kiss her tiny nipples, just about to bloom. But here we are, 2:24 p.m., minds in motion, socializing. A room full of straight, demented, and not so demented couples. Sylvie blushes, but only just a little. Her smile coy as she wraps her scent around Marie-Claire. Jim, the Scotsman, reaches for more tea and a bicky. The room's silent for one sweet moment while I move on to the next question. Okay. So this book just came out this year. I've been working with composers with the Vancouver Island Symphony, and it was Patty, my partner, who said, Tina, you can't go to that exhibit with an old book. So you need a new book. Caitlin Press, actually, their local, my publisher, and we got it together in record time. But so the composers like Sylvina choose poems, and it's always a delight to me to see what they choose and what they put to music or what they create. I love collaborating. Okay. So I'm going to read the one Sylvia chose called Portrait of the Immigrant. It's Lake Cowichan, late June, outside breakfast. Dad is preparing smelt nets for our annual trek to Port Renfrew. He is a master with detail, like the first aid kits he prepared during the war. He uses his hands to teach me about the world. Fishing nets, garden stakes, how to mend a hole in my bike tire. Each night he sleeps in his chair, the news watching him, the weight of the world. I've been writing this poem for centuries, the immigrati who ended up wet and cold by the promise of a new life, a better paycheck, lost himself letter by letter as the Italian slipped away, curse of English on his tongue. With his pocket knife, he carved out a life here among the cedar, hemlock, fir, ancient stands. The son, a distant cousin who left town to ripen tomatoes on another continent, a washed-out watercolor. So this is called Nonna's house. Nonna sits up all night, prays the rosary, sometimes silent, sometimes sotto voce, Ave Maria, prega per noi, me lying beside her with one eye open, a dolphin asleep, keeping track of the wind, falling debris outside the window. Nonna speaks in a rhythm foreign to this land, a language almost dead as she prays for the wind to die down. It's the wood she isn't used to. Houses made of stone don't blow in the wind. Here, this house remembers a few short years ago when it was a tree, and does what a tree must do, sway. She prays to her God to keep the roof on, her granddaughter safe, and this new life at least better than the centuries of tears she came from.
I think every time, you read something, you kind of have to take it in, and then,
there's a lot going
that
on.
was, and then read it again. Like the amount of times I read these poems, just to think about what I wanted to paint, it's just amazing. And it's like, oh, every time it's such a good thing. Right? So it's good to have this little time that I can think about.
Okay, I'll read a couple more. Water and wine. She cranked up the heat, he turned it down. He drank wine at dinner, she never sat long enough to eat. She watered her flowers too much. He used just enough on his garden tomatoes staked perfectly like the old country. When she started to make Mr. Noodles every day for lunch, he took up cooking. Sugo, insalata, pasta piselli. She watched, dried the dishes, dried the same spot on the counter over and over. He stood, she stood. He went downstairs to the laundry room, she followed. He watered her flowers. She helped, stood there long after the water was shut off. Advice to the poet. Don't bring an umbrella when it rains. In fact, leave your jacket at home too. Walk, march, dance, and jump your way through potholes so deep your new boots are now sullied and drenched. Get wet. Find the path beside the creek. Listen for the salmon. They are remembering their way home.
So, yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. That was really good.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed working with your poems. I feel like I know you better because of
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well,
thank
and your
you.
creations are wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not it's whatever caught my attention at the time, and sometimes it's even interpreting your words but putting in a little bit of my own
Of course.
that
Yeah.
has maybe a relationship or maybe not. And one example is the one with the chickens, because you put the chickens as the name that you thought it was the name,
Yeah.
and it's actually the Italian name. And when I wrote it in Spanish
Oh.
with double L.
Oh, yes, right.
So I'm like, oh, okay, no, that's a little
Yeah.
Spanish in there instead of Italian. So
Good.
yeah. I incorporated some of the stuff that she was talking about. This one was done yesterday actually, but I'll show you anyways. I will put it like this so everybody can see. So as she speaks, I can imagine things that catch my attention and make it into a collage. So the knitting from grandma, the wine that doesn't need to, be left alone too long, and the geraniums, of course. She brings the geraniums up a lot. The tomatoes, the geraniums, the forest, and all the different trees here as opposed to that. So in this next painting, I did that as well. The forest, kind of like I imagine it here, and then in the background, a mingle in this case of something that she would find here, but also some very warm colors from Italy. That's typical, the same thing I wanted to portray on that one. The grandma sitting that she read on one board. And I imagine her knitting while she's trying to gossip.
Yeah.
And the geraniums and the trout, of course, you also mentioned that in two poems, two different books, same line. Here we go again with the knitting and the trees and the wine and the tomatoes. I was going to go for the boots. So it's typically just imagery.
Yeah.
And working on the black.
Oh, yeah.
Makes the colors pop out. It's really fun. This is a fun sketchbook that I used to do this type of thing. So, yeah. Wonderful.
Yay.
That's the story of this. But my work is mostly mixed media, which is done with collage of my own creations, of my own papers. And James knows all about it because he sees it happen. So I do monoprints, create my own collage papers, incorporate those in, then use other acrylics or watercolors, magazine cutouts, and my own writing as well. And so that's my work. I'm happy that you're all here.
Yeah, thanks for coming, everybody. Yeah. Thank you.